You're listening to the School Leadership Reimagined podcast, episode 140. How do builders like us make a dramatic difference in the lives of our students in spite of all the obstacles we face? How do you keep your vision for your school from being held hostage by resistant teachers, uncooperative parents, ridiculous district policies, or a lack of time, money, or resources? If you're facing those challenges right now, here's where you'll find the answers, strategies, and actionable tips you need to overcome any obstacle you face. You don't have to wait to make a difference in the lives of the people you serve. You can turn your school into a success story right now with the people and resources you already have. Let's get started. Hey builders, welcome to another episode of the School Leadership Reimagined podcast. I'm your host, Robyn Jackson, and today we're going to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And that topic is the difference between methods and principles. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that we've been doing this whole series that we're calling a versus series, where we're looking at the way that you've been trained as a leader versus the way that you need to become if you want to be a builder. And it's really about upgrading, reimagining your role in your school and helping you upgrade your practice to join an elite group of principals who are actually building better schools, who are not just maintaining the status quo and surviving this year, but they're building. And so as we talk about what it means to be a builder, a lot of what we're doing is we are shedding some of the way that we were trained, some of the ways that we were told we had to be, because those methods aren't serving us. And today is a really good example of that. You know, a lot of people ask me questions like, okay, what suggestion do you have for me to handle X? Or what's the best way to teach Y, or how do I get my teachers to do Z? Or do you have a strategy or a program that can help me do this? And although people ask me those questions quite frequently, my answer is always the same, and it depends. Well, it depends on your vision and mission and core values. It depends on the systems that you have set up in your school. And so it's really hard for me to give you a good answer because I could tell you maybe even my favorite way of getting teachers to differentiate their instruction or my favorite way to set up my feedback schedule. But that's a way that works for me, and it's not a way that works for you. And I see a lot of times on principals, kind of listservs and Facebook groups, people are asking things like, what's the best reading program? Or what's your best strategy for handling discipline? Or I need some ideas for PD day. We've done this, and this. Does anyone have another idea? And whenever I see those questions, I cringe. Not because they're bad questions. I mean, if you're following a leadership paradigm, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you tap into the collective wisdom? But the challenge is that when you ask those questions, what is the best way? It presumes that there is one best way. And it's really about thinking about what is the best way for our school. And you can't answer that question without context. So a lot of times we get really seduced by methods and we ignore the principles. And so today I want to talk about the difference between the two and why it matters. But before I do that, I want to talk about Buildership University. You've heard me talk about it and mention it, but here's another reason why you need to join. If you are not already a member of Buildership University, here's a reason why you need to join today, right now. As you know, Builders Lab is coming up next week. We get started on January 31st. And if you aren't able to come to Builders Lab, but you want to find out what it's like and get a feel for what it's like, we are offering a free backstage pass. And when you get that backstage pass, you will get the entire first session of Builders Lab absolutely free. So the only way that you can get a backstage pass, however, is that you are a member of Buildership University. We're giving everybody who's a member of Buildership University a backstage pass to the first session of Builders Lab. Now, here's why that's important. I have redone the first session of Builders Lab. So even if you've been to Builders Lab in the past, you're going to see that there have been some upgrades, because as I learn new things, I share them with you. And so we have a new paradigm that I'm going to be rolling out at this Builders Lab. And if you want to see that, if you want to see what's coming up, if you want to get a feel for what we're going to be doing inside of Builders Lab, then the best way to do that is to join Buildership University. If you join Buildership University right now, and you can join for free, you're going to get access to your own personal Builders Lab dashboard. And on that dashboard, there'll be a link to be able to join the first session and see it. We'll also have the replay up. So if there's something happening in your school and you can't make it live, the replay for that first session will be up for a limited period of time. So you'll have time to rewatch it. Plus, I'll try to sneak you a couple of handouts in your free resources section of Buildership University. So all of that, again, absolutely free. So all you need to do to join Buildership University is go to buildershipuniversity.com, and you can join at the free level, or you can join at the insider level. So if you want to get more than just a couple of snippets from Buildership University and that first session for free, you'll get that at the insider level too. But then you want to have follow-up conversations about that. You want to be involved in getting the work done to fulfill that Buildership model. That's where you come and get it done in Buildership University. That's where I am inside coaching builders every single day. And it is my favorite thing to do. It is really, we have such a special group of builders inside of Buildership University at that insider level. And so we are supporting each other. I'm doing coaching. I'm personally invested in their schools. And if you want that, then you can go to buildershipuniversity.com and you just pick the insider level to join at the insider level. But either way, you need to join quickly, because in a few days, we are going to be starting Builders Lab. And if you want to get that first session, join Buildership University. Now, here's something else. Because you're a podcast listener, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. After Builders Lab, we are going to be doing a free half-day training. And it's just for people who are inside of the Mind Steps universe. We're not advertising this anywhere. We're not telling anybody about it. Only the people who are already committed to building by listening to this podcast, or by being signed up for one of our email newsletters, or because you're a member of Buildership University. And we're calling it the Buildership Bootcamp. And that is absolutely free. So it is a training that is free, and it's a half day. So it goes from 10 a.m. Eastern time to 2 p.m. Eastern time, and there'll be a break in between. So there are 2 sessions. And during those 2 sessions, I'm going to be talking about the 5 levels of buildership, and about how you can begin to upgrade your practice so that you can become a premier principal, a premier vice principal or assistant principal, a premier school administrator. And so I'll be breaking all of that down in the free training. So we have 2 new opportunities for you to access things absolutely free. First, join Buildership University. You'll get the first session of Builders Lab for free. I'm going to be talking about some new ideas in that first session. And then you want to join me on Thursday, February 3rd, for our free half-day Buildership Bootcamp. And it is just a mini course on how you can start to up-level your buildership now. I'll be taking you through the 5 levels of buildership, talking about what you need to be doing at each level. There'll be an assessment that you can take so that you can assess where you are and what level you're on, and then what your next step should be to get to the next level. And that training is happening on Thursday, February 3rd, the Buildership Bootcamp. And again, if you are not signed up on our email list, or you're not inside of Buildership University, you won't get the invitation. So join Buildership University. You'll get the invitation both to our Backstage Pass for Builders Lab and Buildership Bootcamp on Thursday, February 3rd, from 10 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. I think that's standard Eastern time, and you can join us for absolutely free. All right, let's talk about methods versus principles. And I want to read you a quote that I've read before, and I recently came across it again, and it's still true. And it's by someone named Harrington Emerson. And the quote goes like this: "As to methods, there may be 1,000,000 and then some, but principles are few. The man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods. The man who tries methods, ignoring principles, is sure to have trouble." And I think that captures a lot of why many schools are struggling right now. Because as we face challenges, if you try to solve your challenge with a new method, a new strategy, a new tactic, then you are headed for trouble. If you approach your challenges with a builder's mindset and you use the principles of buildership to think through your challenges, you will see success. And it really is that simple. You see, when you grab methods, the reasons that methods don't work, even if they give you short-term relief, they don't provide long-term solutions. The reason that is for one, methods are very specific to a context. So have you ever gone to a conference and someone at that conference presents about some success that they've experienced in their school? So they tried a new disciplinary program and referrals were reduced by 80%. Or they tried a new reading program and reading scores shot up by 72%. And you hear that and you get so excited and so inspired and you go home and you try the exact same thing, only you don't get those same results. Well, that's because the method worked for them because they were in a very specific context. But that method may not work for your context. And a lot of times it's hard to distinguish the difference. Sometimes you look like you have the exact same school, but there's some minute difference in your context that renders that methodology irrelevant or ineffective. But whenever we grab onto methods, we're not thinking about that. We're just looking for a solution. Well, it worked for them. Maybe it'll work for us. Here's another thing. A lot of times as principals go from one school to the next, they start saying, well, this worked in my last district or this worked in my last school. So I'm going to take the same thing and make it work here. And then they get very frustrated when it doesn't work. I remember working with a principal once who was a huge superstar in his last district. I mean, he took his high school and increased graduation rates, reduced referrals, the whole nine. When he switched to becoming a superintendent in another district, the first thing he did was he started working with the high schools to get them on track because they were experiencing some of the same challenges and they had very similar student populations. Only this time, those methods that worked so great for him when he was a principal didn't work for the other principals in the other high schools. It wasn't that there was something flawed about his method. They obviously worked because they worked in his other school, but the context was different enough. Even as slight as that difference was, the context was different enough that those methods failed in a brand new context. The nice thing about principles is that principles are context agnostic. So they don't work just in certain contexts. For something to be a principle, it has to work in every context or it's not worthy of the name. I remember when I first was teaching, and you know my story, I was working really hard to make rigor accessible to more students, rigorous instruction accessible to more students. And I worked in my class. So in my class, I got to the point where I had no students failing at the semester. I got to the point where we tripled the size of the AP program for my subject area, and we increased test scores. And so people started asking me, how did you do it? And at first I was telling them how I did it. I told them all the specific things. And then people would look at me and say, that's not going to work. I teach math, you teach English, so that doesn't work for me. And so I had to go back and say, okay, what are the principles that made this work? Because unless I understood those principles, I couldn't coach other people to do it. The moment that I took what I did and I distilled it down to a set of principles, everything changed. All of a sudden, the AP statistics teacher in my building could then take those principles and make it work for AP statistics. There were two other teachers in my building who were committed to this work like I was. There was an AP psychology and world studies teacher, and then there was an AP biology teacher. And once I understood the principles that made my classroom work and shared it with those two teachers, they took those principles and made it work. Now, our classrooms looked completely different. We taught 3 different subjects. We taught in 3 different teaching styles. But once we got the principles down, we could make success. Then all of a sudden, the AP bio teacher is increasing her enrollment and her results are going up. The AP psychology and AP world studies teacher increased her enrollment and her numbers went off the charts. Not because I gave them a strategy, because my strategies wouldn't work with their teaching styles or their subjects. But once we got the principles, those principles could be infinitely replicated in different classrooms across our school. And then when I started teaching and started Mind Steps and started coaching other teachers, same thing happened. Teachers who in different areas with different students were able to achieve the same results, not because of a particular method or strategy, but those principles. Now, you know that I took those principles and put them into a book called Never Work Harder Than Your Students and Other Principles of Great Teaching. And now there are hundreds and thousands of teachers who have taken those principles, made those principles work in their schools, and have achieved similar success, even with very different teaching styles, very different student populations. When you get tied to a methodology, the first thing is that the methodology doesn't work in every context. Even if you have a methodology in your school that works right now, if that methodology is not grounded in principle, then as soon as the circumstances of your school changes, what used to work no longer works. And many of you are seeing that right now. You saw that when many of you had to switch from in-person learning to remote learning. All of a sudden, the things that worked so well and made your school so highly functioning, well, in remote learning, you don't have access to those things. And so if you were relying on methods, then you really experienced a big culture shock and you saw a huge decline in your students' performance and in your teachers' morale. But if your school was built on principles, that transition from in-person to at-home learning back to in-person learning again became a lot easier because you were driven by principles and not specific methodologies. So the first reason why you don't want to be tied to a methodology and you really want to focus on principles is that methods are context specific. They only work in certain contexts. Principles are context agnostic. They will work in any context. Okay, the second difference between methods and principles is that methods are also very dependent on your style. So I'll admit something that's a little embarrassing, but when I first became an educator, I wanted to be like the great educators I'd seen on TV. I mean, some of them I thought were great at the time. Now that I know better, I realize that they weren't that great, but I wanted to be that kind of teacher. And so I looked at, Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Minds. I'm dating myself. I looked at Hilary Swank in Freedom Writers. I looked at Joe Clark. I looked at Jaime Escalante. I looked at all of these people and I tried to pattern myself after those people. So, there's kind of a trope that runs, like that teacher who has that steely determination. They're tough, but they're fair. And I tried to adopt that persona when I first became a teacher, except for that persona didn't always gel with my personality, my teaching style. I was trying to be somebody I wasn't, and my students saw through it. Same thing happened again when I first became an administrator. I tried to pattern myself after administrators I admired, or I tried to be the opposite of administrators that I didn't admire. And so as a result, I couldn't figure out my own style because I thought the job demanded a particular style. And that's true if you're relying on methodology, because the methodology is an outgrowth of a particular style. I'm not going to name any names here, but I remember meeting one of these famous educators, and he had built an entire kind of career off of a particular methodology that worked when he was a teacher. Then he went and taught other people the methodology as a teacher. And it was very, very specific to his teaching style. The problem was, it didn't work for other people. And then he would berate those people and say, you're not working hard enough. You're not trying it hard enough. You're not doing exactly like I taught you, without realizing that the methodology was antithetical to their personality, to their teaching style. And so there were a lot of people who worked for him who felt like failures when in fact they weren't failures. They didn't fail. The methodology failed. He failed to take that methodology and elevate it to the level of principles. And so what he was creating was a whole bunch of robots who were, being consigned to doing exactly what he said, exactly how he said it, or it's something wrong with you. Well, builders don't do that. You see, who you are is who you are. You can't fight your personality, nor should you. Nor should you. When you adopt principles, you make those principles work regardless of your personality. You don't have to become somebody new, somebody different. You don't have to emulate anybody else. You can be yourself. You can be you. If you are warm and you have and cozy and you create a family atmosphere, you don't have to toughen up because you got to get these test scores up. If you are kind of a person who is maybe not so warm and it takes longer for people to warm up to you, you don't have to like adopt a doily gene all of a sudden and start, baking people pies in order to get them to like you. When you build according to principle, you can help make those connections with people without changing who you are. And that's really, really important, because as long as you are putting energy into being someone you're not putting energy into building. The moment you can relax, be who you are, and not be afraid to be who you are, and know that who you are can still move your school, can still achieve the same results, that you don't have to become somebody else in order to achieve those results. You can just be who you are and still post dramatic gains for your kids every single year. It's so much more freeing. I see so many administrators who are walking around with almost like imposter syndrome. They're feeling like they don't have what it takes. And when I ask them, well, what does it take? They point to a particular model of, whatever the flavor of the month is model for what a good administrator is. They point to that person and say, well, I'm not like that. Well, the good news for builders is you don't have to be that way. You don't have to adopt a persona or become like something. There is no mold for what a builder looks like, because a builder isn't relying on methodology. A builder is relying on principles. And the nice thing about principles is that once you adopt the right set of principles, you can make your own methodology. So when you choose principles over methods, it's so freeing, because now you can be yourself. And know that being yourself is not going to get in the way of the results you want. I will never, if you work with me inside of Buildership University, I'm never going to try to make you somebody you're not. I'm never going to tell you to do something that even the thought of it makes you want to throw up in your mouth a little bit. We're always going to find something that works for you, because builders are not about emulating somebody else. Builders are not about trying to fit inside of a certain mold. Being a builder is about figuring out how to achieve that success story in your school with the people and resources you have. And one of the biggest resources you have is your own personality. So when you choose methods, a lot of times it means that you have to be somebody else in order to make the method work. When you choose buildership, you don't have to adopt a particular style. You don't have to become somebody else. You can build and you can see success just as you are. Now, does that mean that builders don't continue to grow and learn? No, of course not. Builders are always learning. But when you learn, it's not so that you can alter who you are. You can't run from who you are. When you learn, it's about, how do I bring my best self to the table every single day? And how do I still achieve these results given who I am, done in a way that feels right for me? You see, leaders spend a lot of energy and time trying to be something, and that's why they have imposter syndrome. Builders don't have imposter syndrome because we're not impostering. What is it? Imposternating? I can't think of the word right now. We're not imposters. Builders are authentically ourselves. And so you don't ever feel imposter syndrome when you are a builder. And if you do feel it, then when you check in with yourself, you say, why am I feeling imposter syndrome? And you realize it's because you've given in to FOMO. You've given into this idea that I need to be like somebody else. And once you realize that, then you go back to the principle of being a builder, and you realize that I can achieve these principles right now with who I am, even with my flaws and my imperfections and the things that I don't know. I can still make progress because I'm choosing principles over methods. Here's the third reason that you need to choose principles over methods. Methods are time bound. Right. So you know this because you have been an educator for a while. And so you've seen the flavor of the month come and the flavor of the month go. And I remember when, a few years ago when Common Core first came out, do you remember the Common Core panic that happened as everybody tried to revamp everything for Common Core? A couple of years later, Common Core went away. So now everybody had to rewrite everything again because now we're not doing Common Core. We're going to do something else that looks and smells like Common Core, but has a new name. And then a couple of years later, we're going to scrap all of that. We're going to do something else. And if you are reliant on methods, what you're doing is you're setting yourself always to be buffeted back and forth by the whims of the prevailing culture. And I'm not talking about the overall prevailing culture. I'm just talking about the prevailing culture in your district. You get a new superintendent. The new superintendent wants it done this way. The superintendent's contract, it expires. You get another new superintendent who wants to erase everything the last superintendent did and do something else. Or you go to a school and you have a school for a while and everybody's talking about John Hattie. And then a couple of years later, we're not talking about John Hattie. Now we're going to talk about Bob Jones. And then a couple of years later, we're going to talk about, Susie Smith. And we keep moving and changing our gurus. And every time you change your guru or you change your methodology, you have to upset the apple cart and do everything over again. But when you think about principles, none of that happens. I remember when the Common Core came out, everybody was rewriting their books to make them Common Core compliant. And my publisher called me and said, do you want to do never work harder than your students in the Common Core? No, because those principles are timeless. So if the Common Core comes up, if you've adopted a set of principles and you've anchored your work inside of a set of principles, then when Common Core comes up, you do Common Core through the lens of the 7 principles. When Common Core goes away, you keep doing what you're doing because your work was never based on the Common Core. Your work was anchored in a set of principles first. Same thing is true as a building administrator, right? The district has a policy of X. Okay. And now the district has a policy 2 weeks later and they changed their tune because too many teachers were protesting and now we're doing Y. Okay. Because your work was never about compliance. Your work was always rooted and anchored in principles. You've heard me tell this story before about how our district started. They redid our entire grading reporting policy 2 weeks before school started. Well, other schools were in a panic. And to be honest, we were kind of a little perturbed at first as well. And we were in a little bit of panic at first as well. But when we sat down to kind of strategize what we're going to do, we said, what are our core values? What are the principles that guide the work in this building? Let's take this new policy, this new grading reporting policy, and let's sift it through those principles. And when we did, we were able to roll it out in a way that didn't create panic in our teachers, that helped our teachers implement that policy with fidelity to the point where at the end of the year, we were the only school out of 50-something schools who were implementing the policy with fidelity. Not because we were just better at implementing policy. Well, maybe. I mean, when you sift policy through principles, you will get better at implementing policy. The policy won't just be about compliance. You can take even a really horrible, bad, stupid policy and make it serve your students, make it serve your vision, your mission, and your core values when you don't panic and just kind of react and instead apply your buildership principles even to this new policy. Now, here's where you'll get into trouble as a builder. You see, when you choose methods, people are going to celebrate you. Methods are a lot easier to teach. They're a lot easier to learn. They're a lot easier to kind of roll out and implement. They're sexy. People get excited about methods. I hear, sometimes I'm a lot in principal groups and with principals. And, one of the first things they want to tell me is, oh, we do this or we do that. And they talk about the guru of the moment. And we had training by this guru. And so we implemented this policy and we used this strategy. And it gives you a set of bragging rights, right? Like that, the fact that you are, you follow Hattie's best practices, and because this practice has an effect size of this or this one has of that. Oh, we're a Marzano district or we're a Danielson district, or last month we had this guru speak to our staff and now we want you to come and speak. And so you hear that a lot. And that's what being tied to methods does. It gives you a sense of bragging rights. You feel like you're in the know, you feel like you're ahead of the game, or at least you feel like you didn't show up to the party dressed incorrectly. You look around and everybody's kind of dressed like you are. When you choose methods, it helps you to fit in with your other principal colleagues. It sometimes gives you bragging rights with your principal colleagues. It gives you something to talk about. It makes you feel like, and in some cases even look like, you're on top of the research, you're innovative, you're doing something new. Methods are sexy. When you choose principles, it's not so sexy, right? It doesn't necessarily, you don't have bragging rights. You're not talking about we use this person or that person. Instead, every decision you make is governed by those principles. And so you pick and choose from the best. You become someone who is anchored in principles, and they're the same principles. They don't change every time something new happens. And it can kind of feel a little boring when you go to the principal cocktail party and everybody else is bragging about what they're doing and what methodology they're trying. You don't have much to say because it's the same thing that I was doing last time. I'm rooted in these buildership principles. But if you stick with those principles, you're going to have a new set of bragging rights. It's not going to be about the method you chose. It's going to be about the results you get. It's not going to be about the method you chose. It's going to be about the difference you're making. It's not going to be about this method or this guru. When you are anchored in principles, you can become your own guru. You get to pick and choose which ones make sense for your school. You're not just chasing the method of the moment. Instead, your school is anchored in a set of principles that don't change. I'm going to do an episode later on about the cost of switching, but I will preview it here now. So many of us could be so much further along if we just stuck with something. If we didn't just switch every single time there was a new crisis. Okay, new crisis, new methodology. And guess what? I fell so victim to that at the beginning of even Mind Steps, where every other week I was learning something and then taking what I was learning and not sifting it through principles and trying to put it into the business or trying to put it into the training. And I know that is crazy making. I know how seductive that is, but I can also tell you how crazy it makes you and your team. When you anchor in a set of principles, the right set of principles, it's boring, but it produces results. I did a podcast a little while ago. I'll put a link to it in the show notes about how success is boring and that builders are often boring. We're weirdos, but we're also a little boring. That's because we're not chasing the latest, greatest, sexiest thing. Instead, what we're doing is we're anchoring in a set of principles, and those stay the same year after year after year. But here, let me tell you the benefit of that. When you are consistently anchored in a set of principles, your teachers get better and better at that thing because they're not learning something new every time. Your teachers begin to trust you more because they already know what you're going to say. They already know how they're going to handle something new because you're going to handle it the way you always handle things, which is to apply a set of principles to those things. Your teachers feel more confident. They look at you with more admiration because they trust you more because they know from past experience, because these were the same principles that guided us through the last crisis. So these are the same principles that are going to guide us through this crisis. Your parents trust you more because you are driven by principle. You don't have to kind of explain why this new policy and see how, get people picketing in front of your school because the principles are consistent. And that kind of consistency over time not only builds trust, not only helps people understand what you're doing, it also helps you get better at what you're doing. To the point that when you apply the principles long enough and strongly enough, you don't need anybody else's methods because you are building your own. That's what it really means to be a builder. So my challenge for you this week is simple. What are the principles that should be governing what you're doing in your school? What are those principles? You don't need 20, you don't need 30, you need a few. For teaching, you need, 7, like the 7 principles of effective instruction. And those principles cover every single situation you will ever face as a teacher can be solved by one of those 7 principles. So if I were running a building today, that's what I would do. I'd get the teachers focused on that. All our PD would be around those principles. All the feedback would be around those principles, because once the teachers get those principles down, you can trust teachers with any kid in any situation and know that they're going to make the right decision because they're using the right set of principles. And for those of you who are administrators, what are those principles? Easy. The principles of buildership. And those are that buildership model: purpose, people, pathway, and plan. You want to get stuff done as a principal? Those are the principles that you need to use. The principle of purpose and establishing the right purpose, the principle of people and moving the will and skill of your teachers, the principle of pathway, understanding what your biggest constraint is, and then plan. How do you have disciplined execution so that you see results? That's it. Those are the only principles you need. But this week, I want you to really think about what are the principles that have consistently guided your work. And if you're not sure, you don't have any principles, then you need to join Buildership University, because that's all we do in Buildership University. And you may need to come to Builders Lab, because at Builders Lab, we talk about not only the principles of buildership, but we also talk about those 7 principles of effective instruction and how they work together to transform schools and transform the lives of your students. So your challenge this week is simple. What are the principles that should be guiding and governing your work? And then it's just a matter of being disciplined enough to not react or even respond when something happens. But first, take that situation, sift it through your principles, and come out on the other end with the right thing to do. It really is a difference between methods and principles. And I'm going to tell you right now, methods are crazy making. Principles help you build. So this week, what are your principles? If you need help with that, come to Buildership University, sign up for a free account. We'll get you started in helping you figure out what those are. Plus, you'll get access to the 7 principles of effective instruction. I think that's loaded in the free resources section already in your dashboards for those of you who are already Buildership University members. And then start thinking about what are the principles that govern your work. Because the difference between methods and principle is often the difference between repeated failure and dramatic success, especially when you choose to abide by the right principles like a builder. I'll talk to you next time. Hey, if you're ready to get started being a builder right away, then I want to invite you to join us at Buildership University. It's our exclusive online community for builders just like you, where you'll be able to get the exact training that you need to turn your school into a success story right now with the people and resources you already have. Inside, you'll find our best online courses, live trainings with me, tons of resources, templates, and exemplars, and monthly live office hours with me, where you can ask me anything and get my help on whatever challenge you're facing right now. If you're tired of hitting obstacle after obstacle and you're sick of tiny little incremental gains each year, if you're ready to make a dramatic difference in your school right now, then you need to join Buildership University. Just go to buildershipuniversity.com and get started writing your school success story today.